archaeology. We start to analyze those images and try to reconstruct the way that they were built in order to try to understand the size, that is to say, a kind of archaeology of the image, right? So we start to recompose them using very much archaeological methodologies. We also did an analysis of former secret satellite program conducted by the United States that basically registered photographs of the entire Earth between the 70s and 80s. That is to say, we have an image of the Earth, in the 60s and 70s that was secret, but now has been open. And meaning we just don't have an image of the Earth, but in fact we have a portrait of a moment in history. So can we look to this image of nature again as a moment in history? And we start to find several traces that are very particular because they are in this arc-shaped form, and they were everywhere in this territory. Many traces are very similar and following a very similar spatial territorial pattern could be identified. And as you can see, those footprints, those archaeological traces are very consistent with the archive or with this image archaeology that we have done. And most interesting than that, some of them, as you can see in this image, this is the village of Sorepre. And Sorepre stays today in a farm, and even the farmer didn't destroy the trees that grow on the top of this village because those trees, they're so robust, they're so productive that even the farm sort of kept them alive, and they still preserve the sort of arc-shaped pattern of the ancient village. We also did a landscape archaeology. I have to say this project was developed in collaboration with the Boou Chavante Association, the local association, and with them we start to run into these areas to search for the remains of those villages. We did several expeditions in the field, and it's kind of fascinating because those guys, they can really read the landscape as a document. They can really feel, they can really point you where those places were. And that's what we have been doing for them. So we also look at other images. This was a mapping project done by the US Air Force and the Brazilian Air Force in the 60s. And they have a much better resolution than the other satellite. And we could really see the ancient village. And when you look contemporary, you see that they are patches of vegetation. This is Boou, the main village of the region. You can see, even identify the cemetery. This is Obdonoyu. Again, we can see this kind of trees in the same shape of the village. And here it's the Ticino, which is the last village they inhabited before being deported from their land by the Brazilian Air Force. So these are the botanical structures that we identify, the ruins of the village. I'd like to show a little bit of a video of I'd just like to show some minutes, let's say 10, 80 minutes of this video, and I'd like to see this video not as a documentary, not as a film, but as a document, which somehow documents we going to these ancient sites. We are now entering a site of one of the villages, and then you can see most of these archaeological sites are now in private lands. So we need to jump the fences constantly to get access to those sites. So this is Policarpo. He was a kind of our botanist, our geographer, our guide, and he's one of the victims of the genocidal policy of the government. He was deported, but he still holds a kind of very deep memory of this land. It's kind of incredible to walk with him and see the way that he reads the landscape as a document. The indigenous past of this territory is not only recorded in the collective memory of the Chavante people, but also in the memory of the earth itself. In spite of the many different ways by which these communities have been subjected to what the Brazilian truth called the politics of erasure, their history again remain registers in the forest fabric. The trees, vines, and palms that grew from the fertilized soils of the ancient settlements are the historical landmarks that testify to the ancestral presence of these people in this territory, the Chavante. In many different ways, these botanic formations are the product of the village design. They're equivalent, again, to architectural ruins, albeit not dead, but living. Can we claim trees, vines, and palms to be historical monuments? Archaeological monuments, architectural monuments? Is the forest a urban heritage of indigenous landscape management systems? So here he's really walking us through. I'm going to jump this just for the sake of time. So can we read this landscape as archaeology? Can we take this as memorial? So what we are doing now with these guys is a project that I call Tree, Vines, Palms, and Other Architectural Monuments. So basically, most of those villages are in this area that was in fact demarcated but not given to them. So it's still, this process is still going on. They're fighting for this. So it's a kind of the center of the archaeological complex of their village, but still remains outside the area. So what we are doing is a petition for the Brazilian Institute of Cultural Heritage and Artistical Heritage, as well as to UNESCO, to consider those trees as architectural heritage, right? To understand that those living ruins are in fact cultural objects, they are archaeological, properly architectural artifacts. And what does it mean, right, to understand those objects or those living beings as architecture? This is a kind of draft of the petition that we presented in an exhibition recently in Berlin, and we're still working on that. Now, I'd like to conclude this talk with two ways of concluding. I have a kind of much longer conclusion, which I'll jump because I understand that everyone is tired and we don't have much time, but I would like to conclude with two things. First of all, the idea that environmental repair is connected to historical reparation. So most of those archaeological sites, they're in fact in this area that have been deforested. So you see, this is a kind of before and after image. In red, you see the patterns of deforestation, meaning that, you know, it was necessary to take these people out of their land so that deforestation could occur. This is the type of landscape. This is a kind of soya frontier in Brazil. So that is to say that to repair this land, to repair climate change, is indeed connect to a kind of idea of historical reparation. The other thing I'd like to conclude with is the idea that we just understand botany or non-human beings through the lenses of environmental or what we call natural history, right? So palms, trees, and vines, the place that they have in culture is really inside museums of natural history as specimens, right? As for example, Palm House at Kew Gardens in England. And often they are displayed like that, right? They are cultivated like in this kind of artificial gardens, and they are often also displayed in a kind of museum setting because botanic gardens are in fact museums. But now we need to understand those documents not as documents of natural evolution, but in fact as documents of history, right? So our sort of gesture here is not only a kind of activist gesture in the sense that we are trying to protect these lands, but there is also a way of saying if we translate those objects from a natural history museum to an architecture museum, what this implies in terms of the history of art and in terms of how we understand aesthetics, and in terms of how this challenges the kind of hegemonic epistemology by which nature and humans have been separated. And I think it's a task for us as artists, as visual producers, as cultural producers, to kind of do this kind of operations that will, let's say, open up space for us to think the ecological crisis, the digital, and the Anthropocene otherwise. Thank you.
Estamos muy atrasados con el tiempo y tenemos que iniciar el próximo módulo, así que vamos a hacer un recreo de 10 minutos y seguimos con la próxima. En el próximo módulo vamos a proyectar una película, la película Gross Fatigue de Camille Enroth. Tiene un diálogo en inglés que es bastante rápido, pero nosotros lo transcribimos en español. Van a encontrar unas hojas afuera. Les recomendamos que lo lean antes, así cuando vienen ya lo tienen leído eso. Gracias.